The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 897, coming to you on Monday the 16th of April, 2018. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic crime and punishment. But before getting into the topic, a few preliminary comments. As usual, my deepest condolences go out to all families which have suffered recent bereavements, and in particular the family of the late Mr. Olson Peters and the family of the late Bishop Mary Bonady. Mr. Alston Peters taught me at the Barley Anglican School in the years 1956, 1957. In those days, he was known to us as a budding calypsonian, and he did entertain us from time to time with samples of his craft. I remember one calypso in particular started a brand new Cadillac owned by Miss Bessie Black, ready for its maiden journey. And the chorus went, she touched 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, stop. Too much speed for me. P.T., as we all knew him, was a cultural icon. And for years, he wrote a fact-filled column. I don't know, he and Kenneth John are fountains of information in their particular fields. When I came back to St. Vincent from my studies, he came to look for me and we chatted, and I reminded him of our days in the Barley Anglican School, and he remembered me quite well. I became the family lawyer for himself and his sister Phyllis, former senior police officer who predeceased him. We will all miss him, and I certainly will miss his columns. And we lost Bishop Mary Bonady. Bishop Bonady was distinguished in that she was the first female bishop of any church in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at least as far as I'm aware, and I did make some inquiries. When she became a bishop of the St. Halibeth Church of the Epiphany, as I used to know it, I gather the official name is St. Halibeth Christian Church of the World Incorporated. That church occupies the building that was formerly occupied by the St. John's Spiritual Baptist Church at Billaflat. And there's something remarkable about St. Halibeth. It has had 2 female bishops, but hasn't had a male bishop. And the surviving bishop is Bishop Elsa Young. My condolences to you, Bishop Young, and the members of the church, whom I had the pleasure and the spiritual blessing of attending the church on several occasions and interacting. And of course, Bishop Bonady and Bishop Young regularly attended church events that we, the Spiritual Baptist Archdiocese, hosted at St. Elizabeth Cathedral at Belmont. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond my control, I couldn't make it to Bishop Bonady's funeral yesterday afternoon, but my condolences to her immediate family. I know she had been ailing. She had been back and forth to England and eventually succumbed to her illnesses, and my deepest condolences to her family and to her church family. And let me say once again, condolences to the Rogers family. Of course, Superintendent Rogers, former Superintendent Rogers, was laid to rest on Saturday at the St. Matthew Anglican Church, Baibu. Massive funeral, well turned out, and stirring homily delivered by His Lordship, Bishop Friday. And all in all, it was a wonderful send-off. So to you, Reverend Mother Lucy Rogers, and to Tash, and Tajo, and all the other members of the family, my continuing condolences on the loss of Superintendent Rogers. Now, let me get into the topic for the evening, crime and punishment. I have borrowed that topic from the title of a novel written by the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, published in 1866. A book I read when I was extremely young. And, you know, it's amazing. You read these books when you are young, you get one perspective, but as you grow older and get the chance to reread the books, you get new insights into them. I have not had a chance to reread Crime and Punishment, just as I haven't had a chance to reread War and Peace by Tolstoy, another famous Russian novelist. But I recall the book did make an impression on me. And if it is one thing that that book, Crime and Punishment, left with me, is the notion that ultimately all criminals pay for their crimes. In the case of the main character in Crime and Punishment, he was an impoverished former law student who was down and out, penniless, and formulated a plan to kill a wealthy but unscrupulous woman. And he did go into a house and with an axe and did kill the woman. The novel is very detailed and very complex. But thereafter he became a tortured soul, and eventually he confessed his crime and eventually was tried, and on his confession found guilty and was sentenced to a term of imprisonment. Novel based on the city of St. Petersburg in Russia. But I borrowed the topic because it came to my attention that the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Christian Council has organized 2 days of what is called a conversation at the Methodist Church Hall in Kingstown this week, Wednesday and Thursday, which would be the 18th and 19th of April, to discuss the topic of crime and violence in St. Vincent. And one of the persons involved in the presentation and in organizing the conversation is no other than my good friend, Sister Ingrid Omad, formerly Ingrid Williams, who is regionally known as a family practitioner. I will not be able to attend the seminar, but I want to encourage all those who are interested in the crime situation and interested in development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as a whole, and who have the opportunity to go there. I think they begin at 9 o'clock on both days, Wednesday and Thursday. I understand the proceedings would be hosted by Bishop Friday on behalf of the Christian Council, and it promises to be a stimulating discussion, because the issues of crime and violence are issues which have dominated public discussion in St. Vincent and Grenadines in the last few years. Excuse me, please. What I would like to do in this program is to try to stimulate discussion at the seminar on the aspect of punishment for crime. Now, I don't refer to punishment in the spiritual sense. I refer to punishment in the judicial proceedings sense. I am well known, I think, as an advocate of capital punishment. And as the society unfolds, the more I am convinced that the views I hold are justified and sound. Now, I am no criminologist or no scientist when it comes to these matters. I have not researched crime. I've been a simple lay person, albeit one who is involved in the legal system. But as an observer of these matters, no one can convince me that there is not a very close link between crime and punishment. And therefore, any discussion, any national discussion or conversation, if you will, on crime and violence must encompass the judicial system and the modes and effectiveness of punishment of those convicted of committing crimes. The nature of the notorious crimes committed these days involves firearms. Not the use of firearms in a random manner, but the use of firearms in what appears from all the reports we read to be targeting murders, targeted murders. Now, a distinction has to be drawn between crimes which are committed spontaneously, that is, without any pre-planning, just on the spur of the moment, on the one hand, and crimes which are planned and prepared and carried out on the other hand. And I want to concentrate in the next few minutes of this program on the planned crimes. Very often you read of a situation in which somebody accosts another person or persons and shoots that person or persons in the head, sometimes in broad daylight. And from what I understand from the police, some of these killings are reprisals, that is revenge. You did something to me or a member of my gang, and therefore we're going to target you and take you out when we get a chance. When a person or persons procures a firearm, loads it, and he goes or they go in search of a target, that is, of somebody he or they are out to kill, and finds that person and shoots that person, often they wearing masks. As I said, sometimes in broad daylight, sometimes in the view of members of the public. When that happens, that suggests that those who carry out these kind of targeted killings do so in the certain knowledge that whatever happens, their lives are never put on the line, because everybody takes it for granted that the death penalty has been abolished or put on hold. A couple years ago, I did some programs telling you what the Privy Council in London said about capital punishment. Basically, the Privy Council said that even though in places like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the death penalty is still on the law books, you can't carry it out unless the murder is committed in circumstances where it can be said to have been the worst of the worst. So, according to the Privy Council, chopping off a man's head in an agricultural field and having done it deliberately did not amount to a murder equivalent to the worst of the worst. And I said at the time that with that decision by the Privy Council, which in fact endorsed the decision by the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal, I said at the time that that meant that human life no longer has any appreciable value. Now, there are those who do not believe in capital punishment, and they would argue that capital punishment is wrong, it is not a deterrent, that the state has no right to take life, and therefore, no matter what the circumstances of the crime with which somebody has been convicted, it was never right to put that person to death judicially. They call it judicial killing. I am not of that persuasion at all. Because when you procure a firearm and you load it and you get a hood to put over your head to conceal your identity, and you go in search of a specific individual with the intention of killing that person, you of course make plans as to your escape, but you know that even if you are caught and taken to court and tried and convicted, you know the most that could happen to you is a term of imprisonment, perhaps even imprisonment for life. But one thing you never have to consider when you are planning to kill somebody, you never have to consider the possibility that your own life could be forfeit and that the state could take your own life in return for the life or lives you have taken. Now, so that when people gather to discuss crime and violence, they must consider what goes through the mind of somebody who is planning to kill or planning to do violence to somebody else. What sort of punishment do they have to keep in mind as a deterrent? Unfortunately, the approach of the courts seems to be getting more and more liberal. Right now, there are sentencing guidelines to guide judges and magistrates as to what sentences to impose for what offenses. And it appears to me that the judicial philosophy is that you should make it lighter and lighter and lighter. I don't know if the judiciary realizes that would-be criminals are laughing at the system because they can depend on not just the skill of their legal practitioners defending them, but they can depend on these rules that the judges have to follow, which make it easier and easier for them to get off with as little punishment as possible. One such rule is that if somebody comes to court having been charged with an offense and pleads guilty at the first opportunity, 1/3 of the sentence which Parliament prescribed for that offense has to be taken off for the guilty plea. So, the person who plans a crime knows that if he is convicted and he realizes the prosecution has a lot of evidence against him, and he realizes that it is more likely than not that he would be convicted, person would decide to plead guilty, and right away he gets 1/3 off the number of years which the lawmakers have prescribed as the maximum for that offense. And then if he is a first-time offender, he gets another few years off, and so on. So that The prison is full of people who are laughing at the system because they are there for a time, and except in the case of those who have life sentences, they know that they would soon be out. Now, according to the prison rules, you get 3 months of your sentence for good behavior. So a prison year is really 9 months. And therefore, in their planning, they realize, okay, the worst that could happen to me, I would, plead guilty and so on, and then I would spend X amount of years in the prison, and then I will come out. But I would not necessarily come out a reformed person, being set on going straight. No, I will come out, and this time I'll try and make sure I don't get caught. So that we have to ask ourselves if the punishment meted out to those who are found guilty is a sufficient deterrent to prevent them committing further crimes. We have to debate that question very seriously. There's no point throwing up our hands and bawling and saying, oh Lord, there's too much crime, too many guns. We have to look at what happens when people are arrested, charged, and convicted. Is the system geared to make those people who are convicted understand that they better not do it again because the punishment is strong? Or is the system geared for people to mock at it? We have several rules in our system which frankly make it easier for the criminals than for the law enforcement authorities. There are rules governing, for example, when you execute a search warrant, what you can take and what you cannot take, depending on what the warrant specifies. There are rules saying that when you are taken up into custody by the police, you have the right to silence. The Constitution says you have the right not to incriminate yourself. There are rules which say when you are being prepared for trial, the prosecution have to give your lawyer all the evidence they have, but your lawyer hasn't got to give the prosecution the evidence you have, unless you're planning to run the defense of alibi. So those charged with offenses start off by having several procedural advantages in their favor. The question is whether the time has not come to re-examine criminal procedure to make it less onerous on the prosecution without, of course, trampling the basic rights of those who the Constitution presumes to be innocent. So what I'm saying in a nutshell and in closing is that all aspects of the criminal justice system should be discussed, and they should be discussed honestly. And realistically. Otherwise, we just be wringing our hands and spinning top in mud. Now, of course, there are many other aspects of the criminal justice system that have to be discussed. But let us not push some unsavory aspects of it under the table. And let us not be afraid to deal with what many people consider some of the real aspects of crime and criminality. So I wish the conversation to be held on Wednesday and Thursday all the very best, but let it be an honest conversation, discussing all aspects of the system and not just skimming the top. That is all from this program of The Law and You, program number 897. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday daily, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel R. Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.